fact, I'm going to close that project so nothing else is open. We'll reopen JMH benchmarking, and I want to add my jar file to the class path. So let's do that next. So we're going to go into build path and configure build path, and I want to add in an external jar, and that is in my workspace. There's the jar file. And then what we should be able to do is go to where we had our two benchmarking methods. And what we're going to do in here then, actually, I think I can get rid of these two. We won't need these anymore. But what we will do is we'll say for version 1, we want a new instance of our class from the FBI jar file. And actually, I just called that class main. That wasn't very sensible, but I think we'll get away with it. It's going to be a new instance of main.main. That's the name of the package. Let's try this here. That looks to be all right. I'll call this v1 main. And then what we should be able to do in here is v1 main.version1. That's the method we want to call. That could throw an exception, I think. That's why it's not compiling. That's correct. So let's just put in here the try catch block. Don't need it to do anything if that exception occurs. It's just because I think there's a thread.sleep in there. That's why we can get that exception. Version 2 is going to be pretty much identical. So let's copy this. We'll call it v2 main this time. And of course, we want to call the version 2 method. And that should be everything we need to do to be able to run the benchmarking. So let's try and do that. We'll need to get into a command prompt. And I'm in the JMH benchmarking project. So in order to rebuild the jar files, we just do mvn clean install. And we'll just give that a moment to run. And I make this mistake every time, of course, because this is a Maven project. We need to update the POM to say where the jar file is that contains the code that is going to be used in this application, our dependent code. So let's go and do that. We'll open up the POM file. And what we'll need to do in here then is to add in a local repository. So let's just do that in here. And we need an ID. I'm going to call this, I think, Fibonacci primes. We want a name, that can be the same. And then we need the URL, which of course can be a file location. So that will be something like file://. I think we'll move the actual jar file into the lib folder of this project that we'll create in a moment. So then we can do something like project.basedir/lib. That's where our jar file is going to sit. And in fact, let's just move the jar file there before we go any further. I'll do that, I think, from the Windows Explorer. So I'm in the workspace. There's the jar file. Let's cut it from there. And we're in JMH benchmarking. Let's create a lib folder. We'll want to create folders in here to represent the group and artifact. So let's have a folder called com.virtualpairprogrammers. The artifact can be FBI, and the jar file can go in there. And what that means is that we should then be able to add in another dependency. And that's going to be with the group ID of com.virtualpairprogrammers, and then the artifact ID of FBI. Hopefully that will cover that for us. Now, this isn't compiling. Why is that? Oh, of course, that needs to be in a repositories tag. And hopefully now that's going to compile. Let's try and rerun the build and check that's working. So we're just running the Eclipse build at this point. Oh, another silly mistake. We're missing the version number from FBI. So let's put that in. And we'll need to rename the jar file to have the version number in it, of course. So that will be FBI-1.0.jar. Okay, let's run the POM again, and hopefully this time it's going to work. Okay, we've got a build success, so that's good. And I'm just going to refresh the project and make sure we've got no errors, no compilation errors. That looks okay, and my jar file is in the reference libraries. So I think that's okay. I think we could try doing the Maven clean install again now. Let me open the correct command prompt to do that one. Okay, that looks to have all gone through. So it's time for us to finally run the actual test itself. So we do that, of course, with java-jar, and then the folder is target. Under that is benchmarks.jar. That's all we need to do. I'm going to go with the default options and we'll leave that to run. And once again, I'm going to pause the camera while it's running. And then when it's finished, we'll look at the results. This one I expect is going to take quite a bit of time to run. And well, that's finally finished. As you can see on my machine, that took around about 25 minutes. And what that's telling us then is that now, well, I would say there's not that much in it, but it does look like the version 2 is slightly better now than version 1. Version 2 is giving us 0.11 operations per second compared to 0.09 operations per second on version 1. Now, actually, I think it's arguable whether or not that's meaningful, because you'll notice the error value is slightly higher on version 2. These numbers are quite close together, but I guess we can certainly say that we haven't deteriorated the performance by moving to version 2. Whether we've made a meaningful change or not, that's debatable. And I guess that's part of the problem with benchmarking, is that you could do an awful lot of work like we have done here and not necessarily end up with anything that much better. But I hope this has been a useful exercise nonetheless. We now at least know how to evaluate 2 versions of code in a robust way, which means that we're ready to go on to the next part of our course. And that's going to be looking at different coding choices that we can make and how those coding choices impact on performance. So when you're ready, I'll see you in chapter 20.